Okay, you got it. For you, anything.
I'm not Brian Edwards. As you can tell, I don't have that square chin. But I am speaking in his time slot, so I thought it was only appropriate that I take the time necessary. But I promise that if I don't hit oil in 30 minutes, I'll stop boring. Plans. We have a weekly planning calendar here, or we'd be quickly snowed under. We have plans. We have plans that day when we graduate. What are we going to do after that? Some of us see ourselves perhaps as going to the mission field, interacting with the natives or the local people, learning a new language, learning a new culture, and people are being saved, and you're teaching them the Word of God. Some of us see ourselves when we're graduating being teachers, teaching at some institute.
I like your audience focus.
And afterwards, the students are coming up and their eyes are real big, and you can tell that their minds are being stretched. Some of us see ourselves in a pastoral role, in the local church, working with the staff harmoniously, guiding the congregation, infecting the community, the neighborhoods, work, and schools for Jesus. Some of us, upon graduation, all we can see is doing nothing. Just laying out, letting our minds just recreate, letting them just relax. This friend of mine graduated from college, and he said he was going to go down to Mexico and lay on the beach for a week and eat fruit to get the feel of missionary life. We are told to plan our work and to work our plan. But is that enough? We've got our day timer, and we're keeping those short-range goals so we can reach those long-range goals. But is that enough? Is there something missing? Is there more? James addresses that issue in James chapter 4, verses 13 through 17. James chapter 4,
I like your introduction. I think
verses
it's got us
13 through 17.
involved, thinking about is it enough?
And James
Is
is
there
going
more
to give
what
us,
we're
first
talking
of all,
about?
the problem. Verse 13, we're going to see the situation, and verse 14 will actually be the problem. The problem, part 1. And he says, listen now, you who say, today or tomorrow we will go into such a city and stay there for a year and engage in business and get gain. He'd probably like to have us see these Christian businessmen talking together with their 1-year planning schedule. And they've got their plans all figured out. Perhaps they're going to go down to Alexandria and engage in business there and make a profit. Perhaps they want to go off into the east, the Tigris-Euphrates Valley. They know that there's products they can bring from the coast over there and affect them. Or perhaps they're looking at Rome, the center of the empire. Yeah, that'd be a good place to go. You can see these businessmen talking. You know, maybe they're getting excited about where they're going to go. And we've got the situation. They had plans. And we have plans. Maybe it's missions, teaching, pastoring, or just relaxing. We have plans. We asked James, well, James, what's wrong with this? Maybe it's the city they're talking about. Maybe it's making money. Maybe it's just downright planning. Maybe that's not right. Or maybe they've left something out. In verse 14, he continues, yet you don't know what will happen tomorrow. What is your life? It is even a vapor that appears for a short time and then vanishes away. We first of all saw the setting to the problem, and this is the problem, part 1. He would like to say to them that there's 2 weak planks that they're building upon. The first weak plank is their limited knowledge. The second weak plank is the brevity of life.
Command of your message, guy.
First of all, their limited knowledge. He says to them, you don't know what will happen tomorrow. Maybe that city won't even be there. The closing weeks of December, we heard about an earthquake in Armenia. Cities were literally reduced to rubble. Perhaps he's addressed that issue. Perhaps there won't be a demand for their product that they want to sell. Perhaps they won't make a profit. Even worse, maybe they'll go into debt. We have our plans, and we look out there in the future, and we're planning what's going to happen. What's going to happen tomorrow? What is out there? Perhaps that place where we want to go in the United States won't be there. It won't open up. Perhaps a place in the world that we want to
Very
go to
nice
won't
audience
open up.
focus.
Perhaps that ministry opportunity that you're seeing and you're hoping for, maybe that will gradually fade away. And somewhere another one will come up. We don't know what's on the
Your
future.
directness with your
He's
audience is
instructing
good.
them, limited knowledge is a weak plank to build upon. And he also says the brevity of life. They don't know tomorrow. They don't even know if they'll be live tomorrow. Life is brief. He illustrates this by a vapor or a mist. Perhaps on a cold morning, such as this morning, you can see your breath go out and it dissipates and it goes up. It just stays there a little while and it's gone.
Nice visual.
Just
Kind
a
of wording
short
it helps us to
span
see.
of time. Who has any kind of
Quickly, how
guarantee
short?
that we'll be here 5 years from now, 3 years from now, 1 year from now? They didn't know, and we don't know.
Nice zeroing.
A friend of mine graduated from here, and he had a classmate also that graduated at the same time. Shortly after graduation, he was diagnosed as having cancer, and he died 2 months later. And we think, Lord, this doesn't make sense. He worked here 4 years. He slaved 4 years here, and he's gone. He was just preparing to go out in that major thrust for the Lord, and he's gone. Life's certainty is a fragile thread that may snap without warning or reason. This man thought he had tomorrow. He probably had plans what he wanted to do, just like us. And all of a sudden, it's gone. He is saying there's 2 weak planks that they're building upon. They got these weak planks and they're starting to build upon them. And he says this is wrong. Their presumptions that tomorrow will be here and their life will be here is wrong. He not only gives us the problem in verse 14, but also, as a good physician, he gives us the prescription in verse 15.
It's a nice transition.
Instead, you ought to say, if the Lord wills, and we
Yeah, I
live,
think that's a better
then we
position.
shall
You've got
do
your hands up.
this or that. If the
It's a
Lord
little more
wills.
relaxed.
He says that we should say this, but it's just a mere reciting of the phrase, enough. Or is there more? I'm sure he would agree
Tantalizing
that
teasing
it's
of,
the
"Is there
heart
more?"
attitude that it's
It's a
the
good
real
device.
key, and then verbalize that later. He's arguing that we consider God in our plans. If God wills. If God wills what? Farther on it says, if we live. If God wills that we live. Similar to what he's just said about the brevity of
Seems to me
life.
like
If
you're
God
starting
wills
to
that
get
we
into
live,
a little bit of the answer of the
and if
question
God
you've been
wills that we
raising.
do this or that.
Where is
If
God in all of our
wills, a
plans?
recognition of God's sovereign hand in our lives and in our activities. We've probably all had Prof. Hendricks for Bible study methods. And that last class, just before the winter
Guy, I'm very
vacation,
comfortable
he
with your
used to
nonverbal
say,
communication.
I don't know if I'm
I
going to
think
be
it's
here
you.
next year. This might be the last class that I have. You know, at first it was kind of funny because you heard he said that every year. But then when you start thinking about it, maybe he's putting into practice what James is talking about. If we were to think about it,
Drawing again on
if
your
I were to
audience's
think about it,
experience,
I
which
would
is
think
very
if
good.
anybody had a reason to presume to be here next year, it'd probably be Prof. Maybe 100, 200, maybe 300 lives a year he affects for God. It'd be very easy for him to be presumptuous and say, this is where I'm supposed to be here. But every year, he's looking at God's hand. Does God want him here? He's not being presumptuous on the future. He's not being presumptuous that his life will be here.
Good use of
Instead,
words.
he's looking at
You've
God's
used repetitive
hand
devices.
in his
You've
whole
minimized
life
the nonverb,
and the
the
activities of
verbalized
his life.
pause.
If we were to put a statement together up until this part, This is not his whole main idea. This part, it would be that their presumptuous planning is cured by a recognition of God's sovereign control. Up until this part, that's what we could say. He's arguing that we consider God's sovereign control in our
Catch
planning.
a little summary device
Correct
here.
planning is recognition of God's sovereign control. So we see the problem, verse 14, the prescription, verse 15, and we have verse 16, their problem, part 2. And he starts off, but you boast in your arrogance. All such boasting is evil. As we look at the scriptures, boasting and humility are opposite ends of the spectrum. They're mutually
Nice, left to
exclusive.
right for your audience. Very
In verse
nice.
15, he argued humbly or in humility, submitting to God's plans. Here, he's accusing them of boasting. Their first problem was that they were presuming upon the future. And it gets worse. They were bragging to other people, perhaps other Christian businessmen, perhaps other Christians. Maybe they were unsaved people
Very,
they were
very
boasting
nice
to.
feel for the text.
But they were
here, please.
boasting in their presumptuous planning. Not only that, he says it's evil. Evil as actively and viciously opposing God. So we see the problem, their presumptuous planning. If we were to make a statement for the problem through this section, not the main idea, but their problem, it would be their silent exclusion of God reveals their arrogant self-sufficiency. They thought they could do it without God. They had
I
presumptuously
like the way that
planned,
you
which
put it into
reveals
the vernacular.
their
They thought they could do it
arrogant
without God. Now that we can lay hold of.
They thought they could do it all with their own
It's a nice
merits.
rewording device.
When Mount St. Helens blew up and things began to settle down, there arose a certain folk hero, and he was seen on billboards, posters, and T-shirts. This one, Harry Truman, not the president, but he was seen in these pictures, Mount St. Helens in the background, and he was flipping off the mountain. And underneath it said, the last great act of defiance. As it came out, Harry Truman had lived a secluded life up in the mountains. And the authorities had warned him about the impending danger, and he refused to recognize it. He would flip the mountain off. You'd see him on TV cursing the mountain, saying that mountain will not affect his life, and he was not going to change his life because of that mountain. Folk hero, presumptuous fool, presumptuous planner. Well, the mountain blew up, and when they finally sent the rescue teams in, no Harry Truman. Presumptuous planner, presuming upon his own self-sufficiency, arrogantly defying the mountain.
Nice illustration.
We have in verse 15
I'd like
an
to see that
argument for
brought over a little
humility.
bit more on how we might do that.
Here, we have an argument that they are boasting. They are arrogant. James he's instructed them, don't be this way. So we have James's audience, thousands of miles back there. Harry Truman, thousands of miles up that way. What does that have to do with us?
Good, good. This is what we
Perhaps
need.
you've heard, you can tell a Dallas man anywhere, but you can't tell him anything. A certain speaker was at a certain university campus, and he had given his lecture, and there was questions, and a certain man stood up and asked a question, and the speaker said, in one movement, he blew him out of the water, his presuppositions, and then publicly humiliated him. Do you know who that was? That could be us. We're taught here to think, to study the text, to think critically, analogically, analytically, synthetically, to evaluate judgments. And we're pretty bad at it. I mean, good bad. I don't think we know our competence. But it could be that in our presumptuous of our own abilities, we can become proud. And we defy other people. James' whole cure in his whole
All right,
section
little stretch
of
there of
4,
cans that we
1
could
through
probably get
17
rid
is,
of.
first of all, humility towards God cures boasting, fighting among each
It's one
other,
of the
and
tremendous
humility
areas of
towards
strength in this
God
message is the practicality of it.
cures presumptuous planning. If we were to see
Timing
this,
of it is good too.
we would say that James's thrust here is to say proper planning humbly recognizes God's sovereignty in lives and activities.
I think that's
Humble recognition of God's sovereignty is correct planning. To plan correctly, we must recognize God's sovereignty. We have, in verse 16, he's instructing them, don't boast. He's saying,
If we're gonna plan the way
accept
we ought to
humbly
plan,
God's place he's given
to
to you.
recognize God's
In
sovereignty.
1808, in Vienna, Haydn attended a symphony performance of his own work entitled The Creation. He was in such a weak state that he had to be wheeled in an invalid's chair. And the audience was so enthused with his presence there that when it
Probably
finally
like to
came
see
to that
personal pronoun in
climactic
the wording of
section
your main
entitled
idea.
Let There Be Light,
But it's
every
coming through.
eye in the audience was upon Haydn. Haydn, struggling up in his chair, calmed the crowd down and said, "No, no, not for me. To God be the glory." He recognized the source of life and creativity
Nice variation in voice
was in
use there.
God's hand. He recognized God's sovereign control in his life. In verse 17, we see the practical application. You have the problem, the prescription, the problem part 2, and the practical application. He says, therefore, to the one who knows to do good and does not do it, to him it is sin. This has two
I think
thrusts
the
he
one
wants to
thing,
make.
guy, I'd
First
like
of all,
to
he's
see a little more
instructing.
is
He's saying, I've instructed you. I've told you
the wording of
what
yours
you
if
should
I
be
did
doing.
relates to these P's that
This
you've
is
given
an
us.
echo
Problem,
from chapter
presumption,
1
problem
of be
part two.
doers of the word and
Those
not
seem to be
hearers
devices
only.
to help us see what's in the
He's
text.
instructing them to do good. And he says, to the one that does not do good, to him it is sin. First of all, he's told them, I'm instructing you to do right. Secondly, if you don't do right, it is sin.
Okay, to do good is to do right. What is that in this context? How can I tell if I'm doing right? How can I tell if I'm doing good? Is that
When we look at
humbly
this,
recognizing God's sovereignty?
We say God's sovereign control in our lives will become fruition at graduation. It has no practical value for today. Or does it? What about perhaps that ministry opportunity you've been given? Maybe it's a Sunday school class. Maybe it's some other thing. And you just think, yeah, this is a good opportunity. I could take this. Good value of using the text, interacting with people. But if you don't consider God in that planning, you'll put him aside, presumptuously planning. Perhaps it's at work. You've got an
All right,
increase
give
in
me some
hours,
good specifics
possible.
here.
And if you think, I need the money. I don't need, I need the money. I need the hours. Without considering God in those plans, it's presumptuous planning. The cure for presumptuous planning is recognition of God's sovereign control. What about even working on those papers? Does God have any value in doing your you doing your papers? Does he have any concern with that?
I hear a challenge coming
The
out of
songwriter has seen the value of considering God in his planning. He calls it, the title of the tune, All the Way My Savior Leads Me. He says, and when this spirit, clothed immortal, wings its flights to realms of day, this my song through endless ages, Jesus led me all the way. He has seen the thrust. Presumptuous planning is cured by God's sovereign control. Correct planning recognizes God's sovereign control.
Okay,
When we leave here,
you're
some of us have the
closing
vision
down.
of being
Make sure
missionaries,
that you close
going
down
out and affecting the world for
without
God's sake,
stringing it out too long.
if God wills. Some of us see ourselves going out and being teachers, connecting young lives. that they might go out and make an impact on the world, if God wills. Some of us see ourselves as going out as pastors and affecting a small community or a
I will
large
say, God, I think this is probably the best I've heard you preach.
If God wills. Some of us see ourselves getting out of here and doing nothing but relaxing for a while, letting our brains go in neutral, if God wills.
Okay, got you in 20 minutes. Seems to be just a little bit of abruptness.